Hi and welcome to our session about Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework. I'm Andy Slater, a director for the M4 Stack team within Node4. I'm joined by my colleague Russ.
Hi, I'm Russ McKendrick. I'm a practice manager of DevOps and SRE at Node4, and we're joined by April Edwards.
Thank you both for having me. So I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and we have our Cloud Adoption Framework. So what is exactly your service of Cloud Adoption Framework, and how does that play into the customer's role into adopting Azure and moving to the cloud?
So Cloud Adoption Framework's only come out pretty recently, probably last 6-9 months, and it's been a big change in terms of how we help customers and articulate Microsoft's approach to adopting Azure, and that's really important. So to kind of boil it down in terms of what the Cloud Adoption Framework is and how to explain it to customers, I think you'd call it a lifecycle management system, which is a very wordy way of saying what's happened is that Microsoft as a vendor, they've built Azure, they understand across thousands and thousands of customers the right way to do things. So what's happened from a Microsoft perspective is they've taken that knowledge, they've built the services, obviously you've built the services.
Yeah. Well, I didn't build them, but someone did.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously when a service gets delivered, you guys have got a vision for how a customer would consume that, what you expect them to do, but then there's learnings in terms of what's working well for other customers.
Right.
So this is a very detailed approach to say, right, this is what works. It's a documented approach. So there's two elements to it. You've got a customer that's right at the start saying, Azure looks like a really great place to be. I can see some capabilities within there that's going to help move our company forward. But where do I start?
Yep.
Right through that adoption curve of putting a project in there, starting to innovate, starting to use the services. So when you've got the services operational, what is that model of how you use Azure to actually start delivering results? You've got production services in there. What services? What's the right way to do things? So for us as a service provider, it's a brilliant tool for us to use to be that conduit between Microsoft and the customer to understand the customer's requirements and understand how Microsoft expect Azure to be consumed and delivered as a service. And then obviously our role is to help customers get the most out of it.
Yeah, and we want every customer to be successful. And I think we see a lot of customers that go into the cloud, maybe deploy some projects, they want to, adopt DevOps practices, and they struggle. They want to automate. How do they do it? And I think this is a great start for customers that want to be successful long term and have a really good strategic approach.
Exactly. And it all starts with strategy. So myself and Russ are with customers day in, day out. And because of the kind of the mammoth drive that Microsoft have got in terms of innovation and capabilities, it's a huge magnet that's obviously attracting boards and execs to say, right, look at this capability, AI, cognitive services. That's the promised land. But we're over here with a cranky old dusty.
What workloads do we move? It's confusing. It's really tough to think about where to start in the right place.
Yeah. So our role at the start, from a strategy perspective, is to say, okay, there's an ambition to move to Azure. Where do we start? Because a lot of customers, it's a commercial, rewards-driven decision they need to make. There's an opportunity to do great things around transformation, but the ultimate end of it, someone's going to sit down with the board and say, right, if we make this decision, it's going to cost some money, or it's going to give us these benefits. So strategy is all around helping customers distill down what we think a move is going to look like to Azure. So the way we help customers is really to say, let's take a look at your existing estate. We will do some reports around TCO. We will look at different modes of moving. So whether it's to kind of lift and shift, which to be honest, we try and discourage, because in terms of customers wanting to get the most out of Azure, there really needs to be some thought process to adapt those workloads to use the services.
Right.
So our approach really is to take a strategic look at the options, and then with Russ's team as well, we try and find that first adoption project. So what is really going to give that customer bang for buck?
Yeah,
how are they going to be able to sit in front of the board and say, this is it, this is our first quick win, and wow, look at this deliverable. So that's where we start with customers. And then once the customer's moved on, and Russ as well, we get involved in a lot of these engagement with customers. We get that first project, we do a design, and then the challenge is all around, is the customer functionally ready, skills, capabilities. They've got a model that works on-prem or in the data centers, but does that translate to Azure? What are the differences? How do they think about controlling costs? How do they think about getting consistency across projects? And customers, there's a balance that you need to find with customers. They want to move quickly, they want to innovate.
They want to be agile, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've got this speed, this velocity that all the developers, all the application owners say, right, let me go. But from an IT governance perspective, there needs to be a balance that you aren't just creating another problem somewhere else.
Right.
There's normally a mature management system that a customer's got that aligns maybe to ISO 27001, which is common in the UK.
Right. And
we need to help a customer say, how do we envision our move in terms of planning to do that? So there's a few areas, and then skills come into it as well, because typically a customer, the IT infrastructure team will probably be focused on VMware or NetApp. So how do they make that jump so they're competent and capable of delivering what the customer needs out of Azure?
And I think we address that a lot with customers at Microsoft as well, and it starts with the cloud adoption framework, but in all aspects. I mean, your dev teams are ready to start consuming, DevOps practices. What are the tooling? And they want to go, but we need to think about security first. Security is no longer an afterthought. It's the forethought. And a lot of our customers are looking to be proactive instead of being reactive. And that's a tough change for customers, but it's a welcome change.
Yeah.
So it's really great that you have this model to help them think about how do we proactively, as an operational team, we're not sitting there plugging stuff into servers anymore, but we're being proactive in our environments. We're able to automate. And I think that's a really good starting point for customers.
Yeah. So the approach naturally for us is we then agree the plan with the customer. So what does this adoption plan look like?
Yeah.
And then myself and Russ start really working on that governance piece. So we've got an approach which is like a governance MVP workshop, because we can't get the full end improved state of what a governance model looks like. It's something that's iterative. You start with an approach. So the adoption framework offers this idea of a governance MVP, which is kind of like the core structure of where we start. What are the key areas? So we'll sit down with a customer and we'll work through some key areas. So cost control is really important. How do we make sure that, we see this a lot where someone clicks a button, they don't quite know what they're doing, they suddenly spend money. How do we control that? We need to focus on the security side of things. So how do we move that ISO 27001, if they're using that baseline into Azure, how do we apply that to the services? Identity management's a big thing. Most customers have got AD internally, so we need to make sure that is integrated into Azure, and we're mapping out the roles, the identity, rights in terms of who can do what, who can spend money. And then the other area really that we focus on is consistency. So project A team, project B, how do we get them both looking and adopting just simple things like tagging, naming conventions? So we've got a level of consistency.
Well, you call them simple things, but so many customers miss that from the get-go. So they'll start consuming Azure, they don't have tags enabled, so they don't know what the billing looks like, they don't know where things are going, and they don't have control. So it's great that you guys are putting that at the forefront with your CAF model, because that's exactly what customers want.
Great, yeah. And once we do that, I think it's an amazing experience to just get the customer in a room and just work through these on paper. So moving on to the ready status, we've done all that hard thinking with the customer, we've documented what good looks like in Azure. So then it's about how do we stand up the Azure tenancy, actually getting our hands dirty and launching it. And Microsoft uses a term called a landing zone. So, it's really Russ's team then that start to pick up that deliverable of how we build that in Azure.
Yeah, so when we approach the landing zone, we basically speak to the customer, we know what policies they want to have applied, so we basically just start working through applying policies, but making sure that where policies, for example, around tagging, region availability, encryption, that we're not actually blocking the customer from getting on with their work. So we look at basically just creating that central hub for services which need to be shared, such as security center, log analytics, storage for diagnostics, and also network transit. So a lot of customers need to basically send information to and from on-prem. So transacting all that traffic through a central hub and having all that logging kind of gives and shows all the governance and logging around basically being able to demonstrate in audits that they're compliant and they're not any less secure by running in the cloud than we are on-prem.
Awesome. Now you're the DevOps practice lead. How are you delivering this? What kind of tools are you using? Because I think a lot of organizations, have adopted some tools. They might be open source focused, they might be Microsoft focused, but specifically, what tools do you guys use? Where are you finding success in your tooling?
We're quite agnostic when it comes to tooling, so we'd always sit down and work with a customer and figure out what existing processes and what existing tooling they use. So ideally, we don't want to make it too much of a learning exercise for each of the customers. Right. So we look at common tools like Terraform, Ansible. We can work with ARM templates, and we just try and find the best fit. So if a customer wants to do a full stack deployment, so they're building up their entire infrastructure from scratch within Azure, they're building virtual machines, handing over. Right. We tend to use stuff like Ansible because that can affect change both in the cloud and at the machine level. If they're just wanting infrastructure deployed, maybe to deploy an application, that's where we'd use Terraform and ARM templates.
Okay, so great. So great open source tooling. They are also cloud agnostic, which is great because you guys are a kind of a hybrid, kind of a data center company with a hybrid cloud approach. So I think that's good for customers that are still looking to adopt cloud but not quite moving all the way there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we work a lot with customers where maybe they've got a couple of machines they run locally for development. So when we help develop these scripts with customers, we try and do it in a way where anything that affects a change on a virtual machine can also be applied locally on a laptop or say on an in-office machine all the way through to the cloud. So when they are deploying their application, they know exactly what they're doing locally is exactly the same in Azure.
Cool, really cool.
Excellent. So we've established that tenancy within Azure. Russ's team, we've built up over a number of years, common templates, automation. Yep. So a lot of that hard work's already been done. So we can get a customer who probably, who hasn't used Azure straight up to a really high level of Azure maturity before they've even deployed anything. So that's great because
really cool.
we're not having to have a conversation with them, 2 years down the line that everything's got out of control. We're setting them up on the right footprint. So we've got the landing zone, and now it's about moving workloads into Azure. And we've got two really approaches. We've got a kind of migration type stream, which is kind of documented in the cloud adoption framework. Right. So that's really where we're either doing a lift and shift, or we're making subtle changes to the application stack, or we go down more of an innovation side of things where a customer really wants kind of more heavy lifting in terms of a bigger shift to kind of maybe it's a monolith and they're having to look at microservices and break it down. So the DevOps guys obviously can really help with that transformation, and a big part of your job, Russ, as well, is unpicking how the application works and seeing what the opportunities are for using the Azure PaaS services and capabilities.
Yeah, and it's just getting customers used to the differences from moving from maybe a fixed resource to a dynamic one. So making sure that when we introduce, for example, virtual machine scale sets, that customers aren't reliant on anything which can live on that machine, because in an ideal world you want it to expand and contract the number of servers in there. So if you're reliant on anything being written to a local drive, obviously if that server can be terminated at any time, that's going to cause problems further down the line.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our customers, and you guys know this from having a massive data center practice, they have their environments have grown organically over time, or exponentially in some cases, and they've just put things on top of each other a little bit, sometimes in a mess. So it's really good. It sounds like you guys are unpicking that mess and mapping out those dependencies to make them more cloud ready as well.
Yeah, and we're also finding a lot of customers, although they've probably got quite a monolithic deployment process at the moment, when we start to unpick it, it's actually been developed in a way where actually we can start to decouple it quite easy. There are obviously some cases where that's not the case.
Absolutely, and it happens all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Good.
Great.
So the good thing is we've got a customer now. We've helped them get that quick win out of that project. We've modernised it. We've either done a major change or a subtle change. So that's about all that in-life operational model. And we've got two elements to it. So the bit that really gets overlooked is governance. The problem is making sure that we're on a constant improvement with the customer. So we start with a straw man of a model that's got some basic level of agreement,
Right.
but how do we improve that month on month? We've got new projects, we've got new releases from Microsoft. If you roll back maybe, when we, maybe a year ago, things like availability zones didn't exist in UK South, different instances. So the approach in the model is ever changing, and we need to stay on top of that with the customer and give that them. And then obviously the other bit is the operational side of how they use the tools within Azure to support and manage and maintain the availability, the performance and security of that environment on a rolling basis.
Yeah, and we see a lot of customers go into the cloud, and when you said sometimes you have to lift and shift, but you've said it really well that you get the customer ready for the changes that happen in Azure. Azure's a vastly quick-moving platform, right? And so you need to be ready to adapt. And you said it right, availability zones weren't available in the UK. So we're rethinking our DR plans and our high availability in our environments. And it's great you guys are setting that up, that government's in the beginning, so customers can have long-term success in the cloud.
Yeah, excellent.
That's really good.
So, I mean, what myself and Russ have obviously done and the team is really try and be that conduit between Microsoft. So Microsoft have obviously released the cloud adoption framework and it's all the best practices, but in terms of it has to have a broad approach for everyone. So our job really is to say, right, okay, we've got this really broad approach from Microsoft with loads of great documentation. So we then obviously sit with the customer, understand their requirements and do that last mile personalization around it. And obviously we're working within specific markets, we can take that a bit further. So what we've done as a company, so we've got the Azure Tiles portfolio. So all our services have been kind of remapped and developed around the cloud adoption stages. So we can have a customer say, right, okay, guys, well, we've already thought about Azure strategy. We've done that bit. We need you to sit down and do that MVP and landing zone. Or they might have a really strong governance model, and they need us to pick up the operational support side of things. So we've built our portfolio to fit within your best practices because why wouldn't we? You're telling us the right way to do things. So
and it's what customers want, and we need a partner that can help deliver that. That's really good.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that we operate with customers is what we do is we build service stacks. So a customer probably doesn't want one of those tiles; they want a multiple because there is a need for that constant improvement. So I think it's important for us that we can help the customer understand what elements they need to be successful in Azure, and then we can personalize it. So healthcare is a really good example whereby we can build a stack of service tiles that include things like HSCN. We can personalize the landing zone for NHS and official data, and then we can really kind of help the customer take that cloud adoption framework baseline and make it personal for their requirements.
That's really good. And I think every industry is very different that we see within Microsoft. So I've worked across various industries, healthcare, media and telco, professional services environments, and everyone's different. So that mix and match ability is really great. It's not just prepackaged and say, this is a t-shirt size, but the fact you guys can mix and match, that's really good.
Yeah, and that's important because within a customer's estate, different applications will have different requirements. So we can help them, build up or scale down, and their skills will be different for each customer. They might have a team of data guys, they might not. So it's important that we're there to support them throughout their journey.
It's really great to see your service stack is kind of mix and match and really customizable for the customers. How do you deliver that to the customers? How do you show them this capability? How do you build with, code with, etc.?
When we work with customers, we work alongside them. So we typically tend to work with a customer's development team, figuring out what resources they need, how their applications are deployed, and we try and fit in wherever we can with their existing practices. So we tend to share a lot of code. We also tend to do a lot of screen sharing sessions. We make ourselves available on Teams with a customer. So it's quite a collaborative effort between us and the customers to make sure that what we do isn't kept away from them. We share GitHub repositories. We encourage the customer to start actually updating the scripts that we've written for them, and to basically try and get everybody on the same page so we don't introduce any single points of failure, and also the customer at the end of it can walk away with code they know how to maintain.
I think that's great. You guys have a kind of a mix and match model that's very much customer focused to what each customer requires. You build code with the customer, which is great. They can take that and they can grow their organization so they can learn and grow their own teams as well. I think that's really cool.
Cool.
Well, thank you both for telling me all about your CAF model and how you guys work with that into Azure. So thank you very much, and thank you for having me.